like to have a bit more light here in this hall because we're not going to screen any movie, it's live. We're going to discuss live. Can we turn on the lights a little bit, please? Let there be light? No, I guess not. Well, hello and good afternoon to you all. In between the one-on-one to a meeting with three people who understand security and are also in the midst of an election campaign. We're right now, because it's a bit dark in here, we don't know exactly who's here. We can see the bald head of Ofer Shelah. It's shining here, so hello, hi. Can we start with you? Although in my fantasy, you are all three of you are sitting here on the stage and I can roast you, so to speak, equally. It doesn't happen. Don't we have everybody here? In the meantime, Tzachi Hanegbi is not here, nor Amir Peretz. So we're going to start with Ofer Shelah.
נשב one on one. ושלי עכשיו גם. אז שוב שלום לכם, הכותרת של המפגש הזה הוא
is focusing, or at the time of Israeli elections, one-on-one conversations regarding security. Perhaps we can start. Usually there is a difficulty to mobilize these discussions. We need a good story that will exemplify the issue at hand. In this case, I find it difficult to select which one of the stories should I go for, because they're also good, they're also very strong enough in order to exemplify the complexity of security discourse at a time of elections. I decided, and I succeeded doing it. It wasn't easy. Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense, a candidate for Prime Minister, he spoke about the nuclear situation at Iran. He presented a strategic intelligence information coming directly from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem, a stately arena. This was done live on Facebook and Twitter and on Likud TV. There was an icon of the election ballot saying Machal. The information that was given to the public on Likud TV was sent like that, and here this is a good example of the very close interface which is going through all security issues of these very scorching, so to speak, days. So at this time, there is a blurring of limits between security and political. People would say that this has already been done, already happened, but media was different. Platforms were much narrower. We are going on the threshold security-wise, or in many, many other aspects, not only security-wise. And so this time is highly sensitive, particularly sensitive. So Ofer, before we talk about security from your perspective, could you please define the complexity of a discourse, a security discourse, particularly this time, a week before our elections? So as you did state, it's not new, and the ability, and it exists, of a prime minister or the government at hand to set the agenda or to conduct events that are partially state events, or in this way to set the agenda of the election campaign. I think that since the election missiles of Mapai in 61, we have had this reality all the way. But I think that in this election campaign and this time that we live in, this is even worse. We are now already in a year of elections. We started the elections last November. This is September, and we are prior to the next elections. Hello, Amir. Amir is here. At a state like Israel, where we couldn't go through 1 year or 10 months without any security events, this creates a very close interface. However, there is something which is even deeper than that. We are no longer in the days where events, or where we were in a situation of a war and ongoing security, which was a sort of peace. Each and every night, IDF is active, but ultimately the level of friction that we find ourselves in, and this interface of a political and military stratas, their connection is ever so tight, and almost anything that is being done, the issues of how do you publish it, will you publish it, is it going to lead us to this campaign between wars, where one of the achievements is not to escalate the situation. The previous commander of the Air Force said that his greatest achievement was that he commanded hundreds of operations but never escalated into a war. And when this clashes with political needs, and I allow myself to say, I'll try to be objective as much as possible, but it's a prime minister who blurs the line, has always been blurring the line. So this is exposing this to a question: should we publish things as they are? Should we change the policy of making things covert and unseen, as it was always done? Each and everything seems to be infected in some sort, and the thing is that this undermines the security and the trust on the public side. Perhaps you want to say something about the other side of this equation, about the professional command or the security command that finds itself in the midst of the situation. And in light of the makeup of people, the combination of people in this session, this is not a political discussion. We're trying to look at the professional complexity here. So I'll say the following. The discourse at the time we are situated, the black and white of this maneuver, seemingly the political strata is calling the military one and says, these are the targets, these are the goals, you have our green light to go into operation, come back to us after 6 days or 17 days, for example, the Yom Kippur War. This is no longer the situation. And the campaigns of our time are happening more at the headquarters, the places where decisions are made, even more so than on the battlefield, so to speak. This would put the military echelon a double responsibility. On the one hand, they have to be bold, they have to go through the borders of discourse that would say, you're only the military part, you'll tell me what to do. They have to partner with the discourse, they have to set the goals, they have to set the victory description, so to speak. And on another aspect, they must be very firm in protecting the borders, in making sure that it's not being utilized in a bad manner. I remember that Sharon took Chalutz after there was a terrorist attack in Bet She'an. He puts him next to his side and says, go and vote. This is not new, but the idea of our time and age for the professionals to remain professionals, because they're at a situation where it's almost an urge to use their prestige, and you must remember that there is a prestige to the command, to the military forces, and the command particularly. And that will make it more complicated. We are in a situation where in recent years we see that political echelons, very senior, are doing it. We see it going from a certain margins, political margins, an attack on the military command. Look at the Lior Azaria issue. It wants to undermine and to weaken the professionals as someone who will ultimately be the who seemingly is the objective decider. I see that you don't read the memoirs of some of the senior people of the Likud of 1987-88. Yes, 1987-88, says the moderator, when they were asked to point the chief of command as a left-wing person. I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about something which is not a single person. A person who came up in a survey is very popular, and so they want to put them down. The person is the chief of staff, they're wearing uniform. I'm talking about a long-term maneuver. They want to undermine, they want to weaken the military command. In the state of Israel, for better or worse, when we do arrive at a certain political agreement, when one day comes and this has implications, political and military-wise, the question of what does the command of the IDF says is going to be a cardinal question, because they are perceived by the public as objective, professional judges of the security issues. Some would like to weaken them, to portray them as weak, as not aspiring for victory, as left-wing, God forbid, as being fed by certain agendas in the civilian public. And unfortunately, sometimes for popularity's sake, we see other people joining in this. This makes the professionals' job is even more difficult because they're being attacked. But more so, they said, you chose this career, you want to enjoy the prestige that you have. This obliges you to have a clean professional state of mind. In this time of campaign, of elections, where everything is more bubbly, how should the military command maneuver things? Very wisely so. They have one point of strength. And you can talk to Amir later on, he'll tell you as well. In this dialogue, the political echelon is very aware of their prestige in the public. They are very much aware of statements like, you did never let the IDF win, and so on and so forth. The wisdom of action of the military command has to be within this maneuver as well. And there were people, and I'm not going to name names, there were people who chose this. They wanted to stay in the corner and say, I'm only the professional here. That's not the right way to go about it. You have to be part of the dialogue. You have to give your input. You have to assume responsibilities. And on the other hand, you have to maintain your integrity, and it's completely possible. Before we go to your one-liner regarding security, and we want to talk about security and what are your headlines, I would like your view on what the Yair Lapid, the chairperson of Yesh Atid, the political party, said just recently, last Sunday, while, I'm sorry, I forgot the quotation right now, but he talked against the Prime Minister while the security event was still happening. Maybe this is where the red line goes. I'll say it very simply. At the days of Netanyahu, and not only recently in this recent event, Netanyahu, since you dragged me there, I have no other option but saying that Netanyahu has always broken this vagueness or this silence going from bombarding the nuclear reactor in Syria, etc. But in recent year or two, he's systematically and purposefully breaking this policy. You could say that if the Prime Minister decides, and he is a decision maker, but this policy of staying vague regarding what Israel has been doing or not doing, particularly in Syria, this is serving us very well. We can continue operating and not reach a situation where our enemy feels that the situation has been escalating. Yair Lapid talked about that. Well, Tzachi Hanegbi is going to respond to that. But I did talk about those borderline, those red lines of the politicians. Is it right, while an operation is still going on, and there is a declaration of stopping the election campaign for 15 minutes, and Yair Lapid is still saying what he has to say? When Yair Lapid said, we already knew that there were no people injured in this event, and I'll say it once again. These situations are ones that are evolving. It is not a single point of opening fire and then another point of stopping the operation. In the situation where political echelon. Some of the responsibility is putting things very straightforward and never fear the political implications, if it's going to be popular or not. And the feeling, apropos this event and others, where Benjamin Netanyahu is breaking this policy of vagueness and causing some damage to security, this was shared by Yair Lapid and by me as well. Even if it's going to harm your prospect in the elections, you said it, you hinted. I said it very explicitly. Okay, so can I have your one-liner, please? Well, I'll give you an overhead titles or an overhead statement. We are at a time and age of a window of opportunity in the Middle East. This was opened in 2011 with the Arab Spring, with this great turmoil in the area, and created a situation where Israel has joint interest with countries that we never had any interest with on this level. They are countries that aspire stability, I would say. They're not moderate, perhaps, but they aspire to stability. This is Saudi Arabia, Gulf area, Jordan, and Egypt. And we say, have been saying to Benjamin Netanyahu for a long time now, and we're going to lead the way if we win the election. When we win the elections, we must utilize this window of opportunities, this window of possibilities. We have to bring back peace to the Middle East, and it's going to be led by three leading heads. We need all three. This illusion that we can have a relationship with these countries while we're still hiding the Palestinian issue under the table, this is not existent. And we have to go towards a regional move that's going to bring back the United States to the Middle East, that creates a situation where we are unanimously handling the place of Israel in this area, and the issue of there's no way of avoiding Syria and Iran issues, and also taking out the Palestinian issue and separating from the Palestinians as well as the Gaza issue. The solution for all these three focal points is simultaneous, and it goes through this track. This is what we intend to do. Thank you very much, Ofer Shelah, from the Kahol Lavan, Blue and White political party. You're more than welcome to stay with us. Would you like to sit all together, guys? Yes. Okay, we have sports people. Okay, so Ofer, perhaps you can stay with us. Hello.
אני מבינה שאתה צריך להקדים ולעזוב. אם מתחשק לך...
Now we continue one-on-one with you, the Minister for Regional Development, Hanegbi. And hello. He is very worried about my campaign as well, so we'll do it one-on-one. First of all, Tzachi Hanegbi, hello. We started with a general statement about what's happening these days and the complexity of talking about security issues during an election campaign. What is your complexity? What is your view about it? Well, complexity is usually in the media. It doesn't exist in practice. The decision makers are completely detached. Maybe it's human, but I'm sure they're thinking about all sorts of thoughts, but in the deliberations in the cabinet and the discussions, they are sensitive to the political issues, but they have no impact whatsoever on the decisions. I can testify to that. I am the one who is privileged to be a member in this forum of the political cabinet. How often did it convene in the last 3 months? Many times. Actually, the election started in December to April, and then from April to today. So actually we're talking about 8 months where many decisions were made in the cabinet, she's asking. Yes, in the cabinet, very sensitive issue, a lot of deliberations, long hours, and of course not everything is exposed or open. But even the things that were exposed, Israel was faced or described as the one who acted. These were deliberations that the cabinet was involved with. I started with an example, some examples that do represent some sort of complexity. In the appearance of the Prime Minister yesterday in the Foreign Office, because he presented strategic, sensitive security information, and when it goes live on Twitter or Facebook, there's a sign of the political party Likud. The Prime Minister doesn't expose things in the ITV, but also in yesterday's event, these are exposures that the Prime Minister is leading in the UN, and he did it in September in the event where the PM exposed the significance of bringing the Iranians things that were made in the past. And this is, of course, not regular things, but I can tell you, and this is a fact, nobody disputes that these are not decisions that were made by the Prime Minister personally. This is the result of a deliberation, of a discourse, of thinking about it, with all the security factors. And the people involved, maybe that's one of the arguments that you're not involved, that he's doing the campaign by himself. But I think that we're in a campaign in the midst, actually in the last minutes of the campaign. So what about timing? IAEA took a decision regarding the exposure of the Prime Minister in September about the sites that are suspected of doing illegal activities. We had to wait until we finished all the processes, and IAEA actually acted actively and efficiently and required from the Iranians to expose what the PM exposed. Of course, he did it together with the Mossad and other security forces. But at the time, I'm talking about last time, and as a result of this exposure, pressure that made the Iranians respond or react, and to stall, to try and to wait and to delay the requirements of IAEA. And you know all the publications that were at the time. I cannot testify to that, but you know, all these publications to me look accurate, and it's a time for another exposure. Yes, but it's not a political thing. The only political thing about it is the criticism. It's not something that can bring you votes. It has nothing to do with ideology. I'm sure that Ofer and Amir also identify with the opinion of the right that we have to isolate Iran. It's not just them, she says. Anybody would say the thing. Yes, but you know, the government in the last 10 years, they were leading this process, and this is the strategic process of isolating Iran because of the violations. I sat here and I heard the interview with Ofer. The only political thing that had to do with this thing was political criticism that derived from the complexity and the sensitivity, because there's an election campaign. Because, you know, the chief of staff and the head of Mossad are partners to this political decision. That's not jeopardizing anything about the Prime Minister, but it's jeopardizing those institutes. And they're popular because we know how to detach them from political criticism, and we should. Will it be correct on the part people who can do it, to be very careful. This is such a hot, so to speak, period before the elections, and people appear in public and they are perceived as part of the political campaign. But you say they were done bona fide. The security life did not stop because of the campaign. The Prime Minister shouldn't put an attire on himself as if he's somebody who doesn't make decisions. He makes decisions. Somebody said here that on the face of it, the period of Netanyahu, the policy of vagueness was changed. I'm telling you, vagueness was and still is. It's always there, but there's always flexibility as well. The two first people, by order, who cracked this vagueness policy totally and adopted the new policy, which is to the vagueness a little bit. You know, Amir knows about it, and the former chief of staff in his interview to New York Times said things that until then no party dared say. Amir Eshel, the head of the Air Force, he didn't say just we attacked this and that. He said we acted in a covert way, hundreds of times, he said. I think it was 3-digit number, so it's at least 100, it may be a little more. Hundreds of times in Syria, he said it. And this is something that Israel never confirmed, never said. And even Amir sitting here, he said it when he, just in order to praise himself. He said it because we as a country had an interest to clarify to the other side, namely the Iranians. They should understand. And those people who criticize the policy of Soleimani in Iran, that we will not enable them to entrench themselves military in Syria. And after that, the chief of staff, Eisenkot, in the New York Times, he said that Israel attacked, I think he said, thousands of Iranian targets. Yes, this is our decision. We were aware of the fact that is a public, so it's not that the PM or the Minister of Defense. This was an interview, and we have here a Minister of Defense, that nobody gives an interview without the relevant messages of the government are acute up to the last dot. And we wanted that this context of acting against the Iranian entrenching in of Iran. And we said that this is a policy that there's no compromise on any cost. Any cost. It's not just important that we say things in general, but sometimes we have to detail. And the idea is to contribute information to the opponents, to the line of Qasem Soleimani, with the authority of the chief leader in Iran, that this entire group that's fighting against Iranian investment in huge scopes, they should understand that it's hopeless because the Jews are not going to allow it to happen. So it's true that sometimes we make a decision, educated decision, not to talk about vague things. There's a reason to it, like the nuclear in Iran that the Prime Minister exposed both in the UN and also the archive. Was the Prime Minister surprised yesterday that after his speech came the announcement of Trump about the possibility of meeting? Was that planned? Let me explain. First of all, we have no opposition to a meeting between American representatives and Iranian ones, or the President of the United States or any Iranian representative. Why are we not opposing? But there's no other way to obtain the objective that the U.S. is leading and Israel agrees with. We're very proud to say that we fought for it even before Trump took power. Now there's a deal, a nuclear deal, and we are very happy that it's collapsing. And we know that the preferred alternative is a new deal. such that will not expire within 10 years, and not a military operation. Of course, there should be a deal where the Iranians understand that they have to capitulate in a few issues that they came out with the upper hand, unfortunately, and this is something that can be obtained only with sanctions that will pressure the Iranian economy, but eventually will bring about a political discourse. So we have no opposition to such a... But the Prime Minister said that it's not the right time for such a meeting. I think that's what he said. Yeah, he said it's not the right time because it was a week where the Iranians tried to attack us, as you remember, from Syria. And there was this attempt of the President of France to impose on the President of the United States to meet Zarif. But you know, eventually there'll be connections. And what has Iran said? We're not ready to any discussion with America as long as the sanctions are there. And if there will be meetings when the sanctions are still there, it will be the Iranians. We rely on the President Trump, and we're ready to swear to the fact that he will not give up the sanctions as a leverage to bring Iran down to its knees. So you're saying there's no complexity, no problems with the security issues during elections. So I'll ask you, the Prime Minister is supposed to give a speech 10 minutes ago. What is it? He's talking. Do you think it has to do with the football game between Slovenia and Israel? I think that's what it is. Football unites us all. And I think all the feelings, nobody knows what he's going to say. That's what I just checked, because you know, people are now expecting things. They told all the ministers to get there, to be there, so I have a good excuse. Well, you can still sit with us here and talk to us about other things if you want. As long as I'm here, no, but really, seriously, the next question has to do with decision-making, all sorts of processes, because security doesn't wait for the election campaign to pass. It creates events all the time. Where are the decisions that are real security issues? Are they impacted by assumptions regarding what your public wants to hear? I think the best example for that at least Netanyahu proved that he's ready to risk his political capital with his constituency in order to adopt a non-populistic diplomacy in Gaza. That's classic, because I sat in the cabinet that Lieberman was a Minister of Defense and Bennett was also a minister, the head of two parties who represent our base, and all the time they have to flirt with their ideology in order not to lose voters. And time again, all sorts of military actions and adventurous one, I would say, in the depth of Gaza. It's a result of provocation and aggressiveness. And in the deliberations that we had, actually, the Prime Minister got a full backing from most of the ministers who supported his approach. But the public, although within the cabinet, in the security echelons, everybody agreed that you have to be restrained. And it was in context that we had to wait to our activity in the north to eliminate the tunnels, and will still prefer a negotiation on the war. Because eventually we know that negotiations can bring about what the war can bring about, but I am convinced. I think Netanyahu lost support because of his moderate and very sober approach. And he's ready to pay the price, because he believes that there are things that you don't do in order to steal a seat here and there. Yeah, but what about annexation of territories? It also has some security implications. All sorts of statements that are supposed to balance this moderation. It's a good question. I don't think it has to do with elections. 3 years ago, I will conclude with that because I have to leave. We made a decision in the Likud party, the old veterans and the new members of Likud, to exert the Israeli law on Judea and Samaria. Some people called it annexation. That's what we're talking. It's not annexating the territories. We're talking about sovereignty, like we had in Ramat HaGolan and in Jerusalem. We're talking about 450,000 people in Judea and Samaria that are not part of all the important issues. They're not part of the Israeli law. They have to answer the military government. And because in any case, according to our worldview, we do not enable, we're not ready to have evacuation of any Jews in Judea, Samaria, in any circumstance. That's why we think it's essential. We're going to do it, I hope, in this term of office. And we estimate it's not going to change the situation where we do not state facts in the area as long as we have the deal of the century of Trump, and we're waiting for that. We don't want to jeopardize the efforts of the president. So you don't think this is what he's going to announce in a few minutes, the Prime Minister? I have no idea. But the term annexation, it's the annexation of the Jewish settlements, not to impose the Israeli sovereignty on 2 million Palestinians. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. He has to leave. Hello, Amir Peretz, former Minister of Defense, the chair of Gesher. Is this time very complex, very complicated, of elections? No, it's not complex. I don't think that anybody has any doubt that the Prime Minister is trying any way possible to use the security forces as part of his campaign. In all his appearances, he appears to military people and other people, and as you know, the chair of the Elections Committee had to intervene. But yesterday's event is it's unequivocally political, because if the State of Israel really wants to convey a certain information and to use information, sometimes you have to expose information in order to convey messages to the other side. We did many more complicated intelligence activity, but the head of intelligence, and if they actually come to the conclusion that because of the events next week in the IAEA and in the UN, this tool of exposing what the Iranians have had to be a press conference, not of the chief of staff. Why would the chief of staff need such a press conference? But the head of intelligence, maybe the head of the Mossad, and anything that has to do with the Iranian question, they had to appear to present it. The Prime Minister would have been there anyway, but it's much more serious. Also, the message that we want to convey to the world would be completely different. I will tell you that when we decided first to expose the existence of the nuclear plant in Syria, because we didn't even tell it to the Americans for a few months, our best friends, because we decided not to expose it. So when we got the information that came from the head of the Mossad, who came with all the pictures, today everybody knows, so we can talk about it, of the North Koreans who are digging the plant, and we got all the details of the water reservoirs inside the plant. There was a certain period when we decided that nobody's going to know about it, and only the Prime Minister and I was then Minister of Defense, and at a certain point there was a feeling that we have to do something about it. And what happened was that the American Minister of Defense was in Israel. He was my guest. And I said to the Prime Minister, look, it cannot be that the Minister of Defense is here and we won't tell him. And then they'll find out it can be a diplomatic crisis. And then, in a very accurate timing, the head of Mossad at that time, when there was a meeting with the Minister of Defense, the American one, the head of Mossad came into the room of the Minister, of the President of the United States. Everything was planned, timing. There shouldn't be a situation where the Minister of Defense would call the President and tell him, you know, I just heard that there was a nuclear plant and that would create complete non-integrity situation. So these are things that we have to do. We have to do it in a distinguished way, and other people who get this information, they understand it's serious. So when the Minister of Defense decides to do such a press conference, it's obvious that it's no question that that's the only way, there's no other solution. And in general, the whole question of a press conference is very dramatic, because usually the procedure in the headquarters, when they hold the deliberations, then they come to an agreement. And this agreement compels everybody. Everybody binds by that, the whole system. And at my time, at the time when the Chief of Staff would come with the decisions that were made in the staff, it started with the Chief of Staff Chalutz, and then his deputy was Eisenkot. And I said to the Chief of Staff, listen, I as a Minister of Defense, I want to know also what the other people thought. And that, he said, that's not accepted. I, Chief of Staff, I tell you what was decided. And I decided and then we appointed Gadi Eisenkot, who later became the Chief of Staff. No general wants to say what the Chief of Staff doesn't say, but we used to put the two alternatives, and he said there are certain sensitivities here. You know, you have to be very careful with the impact. I can give you hundreds of examples. But I think that the Israeli cabinet, to have it hermetic without any leaks, there's no such thing. There was no period that there was a use of cabinet for political uses like in the last few years. When Naftali Bennett, he almost waged war. He said, I was the first who suggested that we should control the tunnels with daily leaks from the cabinet. This was a scandal. This was information that serves the enemy more than it serves the deterrence. We use it in order to deter. We convey a message to the enemy, and then we tell them, we know exactly where your installations are, we know exactly what you have, we can deal with it, take into account. That's deterrence. But using it like the cabinet did in the last few years has nothing to do with security interests.
If we stay with this election campaign, and it's last week right now, you have very, very clear security and defense views. How much or to what extent are you careful not to express your views because of elections? I don't think that this is a game here. My views are well known, exactly what needs to be done in Gaza and Judea and Samaria. I'm not changing any of my views. It doesn't have to do with the military campaign. My basic statement is there's no military operation that can withstand itself. They all need another political campaign alongside it. You can get to the best of achievements, but if there's no immediate political complementary operation, then very, very quickly all the successes, the military successes, are gone in all operations. I was there and we wrote it, and when you're writing your goals to conquer this, to achieve that balance point, etc., ultimately at the end there is this line that says create a new political space. One of the goals, or the strategic goals, that the IDF is aware of is that it is meant to create a new political space so that the politicians will go into this particular space and try to materialize it. For example, after a pillar of defense, of course, there was a time for this political move, but somebody took their time and it vanished. If they would have done the necessary action, if they would have come at real time, immediately after the operation was done, then our achievements, what we would have gotten in respect would have been way bigger. Although I think that Hamas doesn't care, but this is my political opinion. I think it's high time. I think that Bibi is using the clash in the south as a screen, so to speak, because he wants to operate in Judea and Samaria. He said, we gave them this area, we got back missiles. That's a lie, but it's a narrative they managed to introduce into the public awareness. I was sitting Shiva after my dad passed, and those very days, the missiles from Gaza started to fall. This engagement was in 2005, completely different times, but the link they made between the disengagement and the Hamas firing missiles is completely wrong. But part of the public awareness, or trying to engrave some sort of a theme into the public's awareness, is a political act. I think we have an amazing army, and I think it will be very difficult to manipulate the IDF. Ultimately, each and every politician is afraid that if they will manipulate, and if it's unsuccessful, they'll have to pay a very heavy price. And so the very best, the very strong, the security system does not need to go into a clash there. The mere fact that it says, I do not intend to connect to what you're suggesting, this would create a proper deterrence, so that politicians will rethink everything. There is no misuse of the IDF. If the chief of staff decides to go against it, you talk about public relations, you're Mr. Iron Dome. You take this asset along with you and you utilize it, and now there is a new dome, and this is protected, a sheltered room for each and every citizen. Ofer Shelah also signed it. The situation is thus. Until 1987, there was no mandatory building of the protected, missile-protected room. Then it changed. Every building must have it. There are 650,000 families in Israel who don't have this missile-protected room. If you think that the missiles are going to stay on Sderot and Kiryat Shmona, you're wrong. Ultimately, in several years' time, the whole state of Israel will be in missile range, and the areas like Jaffa, Bat Yam, Chulon, the old neighborhoods, the buildings there, they don't have protected rooms. It could become a catastrophe. If one missile falls in one of these neighborhoods, we're going to witness an event with many casualties. So we suggested the following program. Up to 20 kilometers from the border on both sides, the country will pay 100%. 40 kilometers from the border, the country will pay for 50%. 40 kilometers onward, there's going to be a mortgage for the benefit of those areas. Because if in Tel Aviv somebody does not have this protected room, but they get additional building rights, they don't get financing, but rather a mortgage, it's worth their while, because they are going to add another room to their apartment. It becomes a more expensive one, worth more. And unfortunately, the first time that I presented this plan, this idea, when I was Minister of Defense, my last meeting as minister, I achieved two things: this protected room for each and every citizen, and the National Authority of Emergency that became, didn't get that much momentum because the Home Front Command assumed all responsibility. But still, when we established it, it was only very small. But right now, we need to see a balance. It is still way, way far from exercising its full potential. And I must say that one of the amazing people that assisted at that time was Efraim Sneh. He was Deputy Minister of Defense, and he did amazing work regarding the ongoing life in Judea and Samaria and protecting the home front. And when you talk about terrorism, the main change is that when Ben-Gurion set perception of defense in Israel, which is based on three focal points: the military, deterrence, and deciding the operation. When we added the home front protection, this is the most essential thing in our life, because the state must allow its citizens to have life of routine, even when there are terrorist attacks. If one missile here and one missile there disrupts life, then the terrorist achievement is multiplied furthermore. Except for talking about terrorist events, well, this is the issue. You set the topic. We're talking about a war in multi-fronts, where the home front is another front and not a single terrorist event. We're close to the ending of this session. A few words. Ofer, well, I don't know exactly what. I'd like to connect to the last words of Amir. The fact that war nowadays, organizations are terrorist organizations, but the threat, and you're right, is a military threat. Hezbollah actually is posing a military threat on the state of Israel that the Egyptian or Syrian armies never did. There was a threat that they might reach Tigania or might conquer some parts, but they never threatened the Israeli home front as we see today. And the Israeli government, through time, and the last government was very, very bad in this respect. Up till now, with the money that was transferred until now, we can have internet in our shelters. Recognizing the fact that our achievement in this war includes protecting the home front, the continuation of the functioning of the home front, the price of war, and by the way, the considerations of whether to go into a war or not. This recognition has not been implemented, and Amir and myself were part of the committee of the discussions, but still decisions, if decisions were made, were never executed. One last sentence. I can talk about Iron Dome. Well, when I got this decision regarding Iron Dome, let's not get into this whole story. Nobody supported it at the time. But in this decision, there was one sentence that I wrote, and that Iron Dome would change the reciprocal relations between Israel and terrorist organizations. And I think this is a complete failure of Benjamin Netanyahu. The fact that he does not use the space, the large space that Iron Dome gives him. Some would say because of you, Benjamin Netanyahu became prime minister. If there was no Iron Dome, he would have been in a very grave situation. But this was not the intention. The intention is the Prime Minister takes the fact that they have such a large space of operations and promotes political issues. A Prime Minister is not Chief of Staff, he's not Head of Mossad. We don't need all these press conferences, all these striking these poses. We want to see where he promotes political main questions with world leaders. And I think that we can set very clearly we are one of the countries with the most meaningful security clashes where we have no strategy but only tactics. How do we go through this month or through this year? Because nobody knows what the government is doing in Gaza. What would it do the day after any decision in the battlefield, military or political? If we would have known it, we could have exercised some meaningful steps. Amir, Peretz, thank you, and Ofer, Shelah, thank you.